Let's get to their Shouty Show stuff. Let's start with number one. Let's do it.
And you decide if you're Morris, who's been around the NFL a long time, not to call a timeout after you doubled down and you screwed up in the first half. Your kicker is a little shy on a 56-yarder. You leave the regulation time with a timeout in your pocket. And you know what? Your owner loses the revenue of a home playoff game. And when that owner got in that plane last night, he sits up in the front of the plane, everybody else behind him. He sat there and he said to himself, to his lovely wife, and I let Bill Belichick go for this.
Wow.
That took a turn at the end. It was standard, ridiculous rant. And then the conclusion was very unexpected.
Halfway through, here's what I was picturing, the billionaire Sam. Hire Mad Dog as a consultant for your team. So when your head coach screws up, you're Arthur Blank, you're like, send in Mad Dog. And you just have him go off on a rant on, timeout usage late in the game. And Raheem Morris will never make that mistake again. If you have Mad Dog sitting across from you, building up his aneurysm, trying to explain late game management, you'll never make that mistake again.
You think anybody takes that seriously?
No. But he's right about the timeout stuff. It's just
sure.
funny that he linked it to you should have hired Belichick.
But this is the problem. Like there are people that will shout, and the way they shout is it delivers a message. Now it might still be uncalled for and unnecessary, but you're like, wow, I'm not screwing that up again because I don't want that verbal broadside thrown in my direction anymore. That guy shouts, you're just like, you're more likely to find it funny than intimidating. Like if that came into the room and started to deliver that towards you because you just screwed something up, right? You just made a balls of whatever you were doing yesterday. Mad Dog's going to come in and read the riot act to you. I'm finding that more funny than I am like intimidating and, oh, that's a course correction. Like I'm not taking that seriously.
It's interesting that he spun it into...
And then, spinning it into, guy should have hired Belichick.
And that you cost the owner the revenue of a home playoff game.
The real loss here is from Arthur Blank's pocketbook.
Yeah. The thousands of dollars that you lost in that playoff game are really going to be the biggest driver here.
Yeah.
Anyway, as you always say, impressive that he can have that. It doesn't matter if it's the Yankees, if it's Netflix streaming, or if it's Raheem Morris not calling a timeout, same level of angst.
Or if it's the damage to Arthur Blank's checkbook.
Yes.
That's what we're
Mad Dog brings it
riled up about today.
Every single week. All right, what else do we have here?
There's no accountability. They're seemingly just not really aware of anything that's going on, and they don't seem to give a fuck at all about the Indianapolis Colts. I understand it's a business. I understand it's a profession, but I just felt like I had to get off my chest. Late to meetings, like nobody that's good does that. Nobody that's good. Missing or skipping treatment, nobody that's good does that. Having preparation questions publicly, nobody has that. Work ethic questions publicly, like nobody has that. Nobody good has that problem. It's not a professional operation over there. So whenever I have to point it out, it's like I become an enemy as opposed to somebody that's being like, hey, we got to tighten our shit up. But I don't know if you can flip that switch, which I said in that. I don't know if you could just become a professional overnight either. I don't know how that happens. I don't know what the future looks like for the Colts, but I do know there's a lot of us, from what I've learned from reading the responses to that are Colts fans, which I am, that are about fed up with it.
Okay, so number one, I don't think this is Shouty Showy at all. Like it doesn't fit. It's not Mad Dog, right?
Yeah.
I do think that this is a really interesting dynamic because when McAfee just sort of tweeted it out, all right, fine, people tweet, random posts, you can kind of ignore that. When he then goes on to sort of fully articulate his opinion about the way this team is run, I think that's really a problem for the Colts, right? Because for a few reasons. Number one, McAfee has as big a megaphone as anybody anymore, right? The way his show is, the power that he has at ESPN, like all those things together. Like he is as big as it gets. He's NFL's version of like Joe Rogan. It moves the needle. Number two, he's a former player, like a former good player. Okay, he was a punter. How real is that? But he was like a legit all-pro, all-decade type of player and a guy that stayed in that organization the whole way. So his sources are probably legit. His experiences are legit. It's not someone that you can just dismiss as, well, you don't really know how this works. Like, he knows how it works and how it should work, and he saw how it was supposed to work during his entire career. So when that guy goes out there and blowtorches you as an organization, as a professional unit, it's a real problem. And if you're Chris Ballard, I don't know that anything could be more damaging than that. If you're Jim Irsay, it's basically a massive signal that something institutional needs to change, because, as he says, I don't know that you can just flip a switch on that. So something seismic needs to change in order to happen. Like, that is McAfee lobbing a grenade onto the lap of Chris Ballard and saying, have fun with that.
I'm saying, so that was going to be my question. Who's that most directed at? Is it Ballard because he's been there?
I mean, it might be most directed at Irsay, but it's most damaging for Chris Ballard, because he's ultimately the guy responsible.
Shane Steichen. I mean, if you're talking about players, and I hadn't heard the type of stuff that he's highlighting, missing treatment, late for meetings, that type of stuff, that feels like it's more on the coach than the general manager. It's both. Yeah. But it feels like it's more on the coach than the GM.
It is, but ultimately it all falls under the GM's purview. Like, it's the kind of thing where it's all football operations. It's all you, right? The buck stops ultimately at the GM. I mean, he's the highest position person that can be to blame for that, right? Because obviously ownership doesn't blame themselves, right? So ownership is the guy fixing this. If ownership is listening to that, you go, well, who ultimately does the buck stop with?
The billionaire doesn't blame himself.
Right. I mean, it's an indictment to both of them, to be honest. But if you're looking for one scapegoat, you fire the GM as the ultimate guy responsible, or you simply clean house from everybody and say, this is a complete failing from the entire football side. Everyone's getting fired.
Do you have any thoughts on former players always rooting for their own teams?
I think it's fine.
Not so much like should they or shouldn't they. I'm a little surprised that they care that much.
No, I'm not surprised by that at all.
Really?
Yeah. My only thing is I don't love it as a broadcast option, as a like calling the game option. I'm fine with it. Like, McAfee's a guy with his own show who covers all sports and talks for hours on hours. I have no problem with McAfee rooting for the Colts.
I'm not even talking about the biased aspect. I'm putting that aside.
My problem is like Troy Aikman covering Dallas Cowboy games.
But he doesn't seem to care. Like Michael Irvin goes out there and he like cares if the Cowboys are good and gets upset if they're not good. That's why? Just because he played for him?
Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
I don't know. I wasn't like...
You played for 17 different teams.
I wasn't celebrating... I have to relate it to me. I wasn't celebrating the Giants' three World Series that I was happy for some friends, but just because they won 3 World Series, right after they released me,
I think I
was more jealous than anything.
I think if you make it, 10, 15 years with an organization, you probably develop deeper connections than you did with 17 different teams across multiple continents.
That's fine. It's an interesting angle that you bring up, though, that this is that it means something. It actually moves the needle. But
there's so much noise out there that you can just ignore, and it's like, who cares? Like, the New York media, if some random Jets beat writer lobs another grenade onto the Jets, it's like, who cares? Like, you just tune it out. It's all bullshit. When Pat McAfee puts 5 minutes of that out there, that resonates. Like, that's not something Irsay can just ignore and sweep under the carpet. That is McAfee, a former All-Pro, Hall of Fame caliber player, for that team, who probably has deep connections there still and has the biggest megaphone out there from a media perspective, telling you that your organization is like rotten to the core right now.
I got a question for you.
Uh-huh.
Jim Irsay, the man who just over 2 years ago, pulled Jeff Saturday off ESPN to solve some problems. Jeff Saturday wasn't even offering his services, and he just went and pulled him in to be the head coach. Does Jim Irsay make the call to Pat McAfee and say, hey, you do it?
Evidently, you're well-versed on the problems, Pat. Would you like to fix them?
Pat, do you want to give up this massive job that you have in media and wrestling and everything else that you're doing and maybe step in as the general manager?
Well, remember at the time, the logic appeared to be like who was most connected or the closest person to Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning, that was the glory years. Peyton Manning embodied everything good about this franchise for a while. Who is Peyton doesn't want the job. The man's busy. He's running a media empire. Who is the closest person to Peyton Manning we can get to symbolize the way things are supposed to be? Jeff Saturday. Peyton Manning had his hand up Jeff Saturday's hoop 25 times a game back in the day. Jeff Saturday's the guy. So Jeff didn't work out. So we need to go to Ryan Lilja, the guard. One up, one across. So Ryan Lilja is the man. I don't know what he's doing right now, but he's probably not busy. And Ryan Lilja, can you?
If you want to take it out to whoever the sad left tackle was during the Peyton era,
Tony Hugo.
Yeah, then you're in trouble. All right, let's not go any further. We've got one more. I have a feeling I know what's coming, but let's hear it.
Here's the deal.
Oh boy.
Every option needs to be on the table with the number 1 pick. Every option.
Oh, I heard.
And if you feel like this year's QB1 that you can pick, you can decide who it is, you like more than last year's QB3, who you have, then you must shop Drake Maye. And if as an added bonus, because I know Wilds thinks Drake Maye's awesome, if the Titans agree with you, who have the number 2 pick, and the Titans are like, listen, we would take Shedeur, but if you guys take him, we like Drake Maye more than Cam Ward. As an added bonus, you have a chance to truly revamp the New England Patriots by going Shedeur Sanders 1, Travis Hunter 2, Deion Sanders head coach, and say you turned the worst college program around in 2 years. Have a shot at the worst pro program. That has to be something you investigate.
So I heard the second half of it mostly, right? That got sent to me like, hey, you gotta take a look at what Nick said this week. The way he sets it up though, with some logic and all options on the table, like I'm fine with that, and we can talk about that in a second. But that's a lot of work to go become an Alamo Bowl participant. That's what they did.
Yeah. So I love this.
He kind of took it further with the Deion and the whole thing.
I love this because I think this is artistry. This is Shouty Show artistry, right? Which is you take what is effectively a completely reasonable point to make, which is basically any company in any walk of life should be doing due diligence on every aspect of the company. If you're not, you're leaving low-hanging fruit on the table, right? This is just basic common sense. You can't possibly just assume that a guy is the guy without double checking. Like, check your work. You drum this into 10-year-olds and they're doing the homework. Hey, I'm sure you think you got it right. Double check. Just make sure, right? We think Drake Maye's the guy. Let's go through and watch his tape from his entire rookie year. Let's just make sure we saw what we saw, because sometimes the mind, the brain lies to you. The eyes and the ears will tell you lies sometimes, and you should probably double check these things. That's like an ethos of why PFF exists. You might thought the game went that way, but when you go through and record it and write it down play by play, you actually end up with a different outcome than you thought you had when your mind just works with the highlight reel. So it's completely, of course you do that. Like anything else would be insane. And if you're not, so once you have that answer, Drake Maye is X and we project him to Y based off the evidence of his first year, then you compare that to the quarterbacks available at the top of this draft, because as it happens, you have the number 1 overall pick, right? And if you didn't do that, it would be ridiculous. You can't just assume, well, this guy's really good, but what if those guys are even better? Again, without running those numbers, you don't know that, and it would be insane not to do that. So it's all an entirely reasonable point of something that should just be happening as a matter of course.
However,
but by throwing it out there on a television show, you get to jazz it up a little bit, add some juice to it, and B, full well it's going to drive people absolutely insane simply by articulating what is going to happen as a matter of course within the building. That's how you become a Shouty Show artist.
Shouty Show Hall of Famer.
And you don't even need to shout to do it. You just know that by simply making this point, it's going to drive people nuts.
It probably pissed people off even more because he started out so logical with it. All options on the table, like any good business, like you said, well articulated. And then he was like, then you're going to take Shedeur and Travis Hunter and add Deion to the mix, and boom, the Colorado Patriots, baby. Here we go. Alamo Bowl, here we come. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, I had a feeling that was going to be the one. I mean, just to answer the first part, personally, I don't think Shedeur Sanders is better than Drake Maye. Certainly not after what we saw from Drake Maye in the NFL. I don't mind having that conversation. I don't mind having a conversation about what if all these different options. I don't think that's where the Patriots land, though. I mean, that's like the bottom line on all this. If you put a percentage chance on this happening, it's as close to zero as it gets.
I would think so. I mean, this is, to me, like, the obvious example of this happening is Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray, right? Like, they just drafted Josh Rosen in the first round a year ago with, what, the 12th pick? Something like that? Top 15 pick? Top half of the first round. And after a year, they had the number 1 overall pick because they were so bad with Josh Rosen. And in most situations, the first-year quarterback, first rounder, has another year in there just to see, right? They ran that exact analysis and said Kyler Murray is a much better prospect than Josh Rosen, probably even independent of seeing Josh Rosen's rookie season. Just as prospects, he's way better. We're going to take the quarterback at number 1 overall, even though we already drafted one a year ago. Now, I think you would come to a very different conclusion based off Drake Maye versus Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward than they did with Josh Rosen versus Kyler Murray. But it's the same analysis. Like, you're asking the same question. You're just probably coming to a very different conclusion.
Yeah, and the answer here is, like, Josh Rosen was very clearly in over his head. Drake Maye's looked pretty good in year 1,
right.
And I don't know how many people. I mean, look, there were a lot of people that didn't love Drake Maye last year.
Sure.
And so I still don't know how many people are going to like Shedeur Sanders over Drake Maye as a prospect. I like your analysis on friend of the show, Nick Wright.
And friend of the show and now on the Mount Rushmore.
He's on the Rushmore.
Shows
I mean, this
for takes just like that.
That's why he's on the Mount Rushmore. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, let's get to there he is.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.